So now I'd like to introduce a campaigning tool to you called the T-Test, T-E-A. Now, I developed this tool years ago when I was working for Oxfam. And I remember that Oxfam sent us out to Senegal to run a regional campaigns training workshop for Oxfam colleagues across West Africa. I remember going out there. I remember very early on meeting a degree of resistance, maybe a degree of concern from some of the colleagues, slightly worried about this term campaigning. So I kind of developed this idea of the T-test to try and explain to them what I meant by campaigning. So what do I mean by the T-test? The T-test stands for touch, enthuse, act. You know, I would argue to you, and I argue to them, that any good campaign will firstly seek to touch the target, to make a connection, to stir their soul, to really show them the extent of the problem that we're facing. A good campaign will then seek to enthuse with the solution, the changes possible to address that problem. And then a good campaign will get an action. Touch, enthuse, act. And, you know, for me, that really is the essence of campaigning. And, you know, when I shared that with my former Oxfam colleagues, they were like, well, Jonathan, we kind of do that every day. We just don't call it campaigning. And it was a great way to kind of cut the ice and really show that campaigning wasn't something mystical. It was really something that they were already doing. You know, as I've traveled around the world, I found this quite commonplace, actually, that people are campaigning. They're just not calling it campaigning. So for me, the kind of T-test has been really, really important. And I remember a few years ago getting a letter from Action Aid UK. It's a really well worded letter. And Action Aid touched me. They told me about the plight of some farmers in South Africa who were living on poverty pay. And yet these farmers were working for a major UK supermarket chain. And their solution was that these farmers just needed 5 pence an hour more to lift them out of poverty pay. And Action Aid, they touched me, they enthused me, and then they asked their supporters to complete a postcard and send it to the supermarket chief executive. But more than that, to go and find a 5 pence piece to stick it on the postcard and send it off. And I kind of found myself looking for a 5 pence piece to stick on the postcard and sending it off. And it was a great example of the T-test. Action Aid touched me, they enthused me with their solution, and then they got me to act. And what was even better was a few months later, they wrote back to me to tell me that the supermarket had agreed to their request. So for me, the T-test is really important. And I wonder whether your campaign passes the T-test. Does it touch your target? Does it enthuse them? And then does it get an action? And maybe when you look at other campaigns, it's quite a good test. It's quite a good test to ask yourself, does it touch me? Does it enthuse me? And then does it get me to actually do something? So the T-test, I think, is quite an important yet simple tool for campaigners. Touch, enthuse, act. Okay, so let's move on now and look at what makes for a good campaign.